예, 역시 우리 예상대로 40페이지 읽는데 꼬박 50분 가까이 걸렸어요. 나름 그래도 재밌네요. 뭐 대충 뭐 옆집 아저씨 그 마누라가 시원찮아서 뭐 병세가 있어서 그 집에 그 일 좀 도와주러 딸내미를 보냈는데 그 아프던 옆집 아줌마는 돌아가시고 아저씨하고 그 어린 딸내미가 눈이 맞아서 야반도주를 했나 뭐 그런 대충 그런 분위기죠. 그리고 또 그 집 자체도 새로 결혼을 한 각각 딸내미 하나씩 있는 집이 결혼을 한 건데, 그러니까 뭐 배다른 자매도 아니고요. 그냥 각자 다른 아빠를 갖고 있는 그런 딸내미 둘이 같은 집에서 살았는데 그 둘이 많이 싸울 거를 그 새로 결혼한 엄마나 아빠나 걱정을 했는데 둘이 잘 지냈다는 거죠. 잘 지냈는데 어느 날 갑자기 옆집 아저씨하고 야반도주하면서 자기한테는 한마디도 안 하고 어느 날 갑자기 뿅 사라져 버려서 좀 섭섭하다가 다시 이렇게 만나게 돼서 뭐 이런저런 일들이 그 집에 이제 방문하러 간 거죠. 이런저런 일들이 이제 방문하러 간 것 같지는 않고 당분간 같이 살게 되는 그런 상황인 것 같아. 이 야반도주 스토리 어떻게 보면 흔한 거죠. 좀 충격적인 것 같은데 뭐 그렇게까지 충격인가? 하여간 재밌네요. 오케이, 계속해 봅시다. 여기까지 읽었죠? 저희가. 오케이, 시작해 봅시다. I thought he was from China. I said, no, not Chinese, from here. They did play one children's game. They played musical chairs. Everybody was boisterous by the time, even Stan. He put Queenie down into his lap when she was running past, and he wouldn't let her go. And then when everybody had gone, he wouldn't let her clean up. He just wanted her to come to bed. You know the way men are, Queenie said. Do you have a boyfriend yet or anything? I said no. The last man my father had hired as a driver was always coming to the house to deliver some unimportant message, and my father said, he just wants a chance to talk to Chrissy. I was cool to him, however, and so far, he hadn't got up the nerve to ask me out. I didn't want to go out with anybody from home. So you don't really know about that stuff yet? Said Queenie. I said, of course I know. You don't sound like you do, she said. The guests at the party had eaten up nearly everything but the cake. They did not eat much of that, but Queenie wasn't offended. It was very rich, and by the time they got to it, they were filled up with sausage rolls and other things. Also, it had not had time to ripen the way the book said it should. So she was just as glad to have some left over. She was thinking, before Stan pulled her away, that she should get the cake wrapped up in a wine-soaked cloth and put it in a cool place. She was either thinking of doing that or she had actually done it. And then in the morning, she saw that the cake was not on the table, so she thought she had done it. She thought good. The cake was put away. A day or so later, Stan said, "Let's have a piece of that cake." She said, "Oh, let it ripen a bit more." But he insisted. She went to the cupboard and then to the refrigerator, but it was not there. She looked high and low, and she could not find it. She thought back to seeing it on the table, and a memory came to her of getting a clean cloth and soaking it in wine and wrapping that carefully around the leftover cake, and then of wrapping waxed paper around the outside of the cloth. But when had she done that? Had she done it at all or only dreamed about it? Where had she put the cake when she finished wrapping it? She tried to see herself putting it away, but her mind went blank. She looked all through the cupboard, but she knew the cake was too big to be hidden there. Then she looked in the oven and even in the insane places like her dresser drawers and under the bed and on the closet shelf. It was nowhere. If you put it somewhere, then it must be somewhere, Stan said. I did. I put it somewhere, said Queenie. Maybe you were drunk and you threw it out. She said, I wasn't drunk. I didn't throw it out. But she went and looked in the garbage. No. He sat at the table watching her. If you put it somewhere, it must be somewhere. She was getting frantic. Are you sure? Said Stan. Are you sure you didn't just give it away? She was sure. She was sure. She hadn't given it away. She had wrapped it up to keep. She was sure. She was almost sure she had wrapped it to keep. She was sure she had not given it out away. Oh, I don't know about that, Stan said. I think maybe you gave it away, and I think I know who to. Queenie was brought to the standstill. Who to? I think you gave it to Andrew. To Andrew? Oh yes, poor Andrew, who was telling her he couldn't afford to go home for Christmas. She was sorry for Andrew. So you gave him our cake? No, said Queenie. Why would she do that? She would not do that. She had never thought of giving Andrew the cake. Stan said, Lena, don't lie. That was the beginning of Queenie's long, miserable struggle. All she could say was, no, no, no. I did not give the cake to anybody. I did not give the cake to Andrew. I'm not lying. No, no. Probably you're drunk, Stan said. You're drunk and you're not remembering very well. Queenie said she was not drunk. You're the one who was drunk, she said. He got up and came at her with his hand raised, saying not to tell him that he'd been drunk, never to tell him that. Queenie cried out, I won't, I'm sorry. And he didn't hear her, but she began to cry. She kept crying while she tried to persuade him. Why would she give away the cake she had worked so hard to make? Why would he not believe her? Why would she lie to him? Everybody lies, Stan said. And the more she cried and begged him to believe her, the more cruel and sarcastic he became. Use a little logic, he said. If it's here, get up and find it. If it isn't here, then you gave it away. Queenie said that wasn't logic. It didn't have to be given away just because she could not find it. Then he came close to her again in such a calm, half-smiling way that she thought for a moment he was going to kiss her. Instead, he closed his hands around her throat and just for a second cut off her breath. He didn't even leave any marks. Now, he said, now are you going to teach me about logic? Then he went to get dressed to go and play at the restaurant. He stopped speaking to her. He wrote her a note saying he'd speak to her again when she told the truth. All of Christmas, she could not stop crying. She and Stan were supposed to go and visit the great people on Christmas Day, but she couldn't go. Her face was such a mess. Stan had to go and say that she was sick. The Greek people probably knew the truth anyway. They had probably heard the hullabaloo through the woods. She put on a ton of makeup and went to work, and the major said, "You want to give the people the idea this is a tragedy?" She said she had infected sinuses, and he let her go home. When Stan came home that night and pretended she didn't exist, she turned over and looked at him. She knew that he would get into bed and lie beside her like a post, and that if she moved against him, he would continue to lie like a post until she moved away. She saw that he could go on living like this, and she could not, but she could not. She thought that if she had to go on in this way, she would die. Just as if he really had choked off her breath, she would die. So she said, "Forgive me, forgive me. I did what you said. I'm sorry. Please, please, I'm sorry." He sat down on the bed. He didn't say anything. She said that she had really forgotten about giving the cake away, but that now she remembered that she had done it and she was sorry. "I wasn't lying," she said. "I forgot." "You forgot to give the cake to Andrew?" he said. "I must have. I forgot. To Andrew. You gave it to Andrew." "Yes," Queenie said. "Yes, yes. That is what she had done." And she began to howl and hang on him and beg him to forgive her. "All right, stop the hysterics," he said. He did not say that he forgave her, but he got a warm washcloth and wiped her face, and lay down beside her and cuddled her, and pretty soon he wanted to do everything else. "No more music lessons for Mr. Moonlight Sonata," he finally said. What a relief. And then, to top it all off, later she found the cake. She found it wrapped up in a dish towel and then wrapped in waxed paper just as she had remembered, and put into a shopping bag and hung from a hook in the back porch. Of course, the sun porch was the ideal place because it got too cold to use in winter, but it wasn't freezing cold. She must have been thinking that when she hung the cake there, that this was the ideal place, and then she forgot. She was already drunk. She had to be. She had forgotten absolutely, and there it was. She found it and she threw it all out. She never told Stan. "I pitched it," she said. "It was just as good as ever, and all the expensive fruit and stuff in it, but there was no way I wanted to get that subject brought up again. So I just pitched it out." Her voice, which had been so woeful in the bad parts of the story, was now sly and full of laughter, as if all the time she had been telling me a joke, and throwing out the cake was the final, ridiculous point of it. I had to pull my head out of her hands and turn around and look at her. I said, but he was wrong. Well, of course he was wrong, she said. Men are not normal, Chrissy. That's one thing you'll learn if you ever get married. I never will, then, I said. I never will get married. He was just jealous, she said. He was just so jealous. Never, I said. Well, you and me are very different, Chrissy. Very different, she sighed. She said, I'm a creature of love. I thought that you might see these words on a movie poster, a creature of love. Maybe on a poster of one of the movies that had played at Queenie's theater. You're going to look so good when I take these rollers out, she said. You won't be saying you haven't got a boyfriend for very long. But it'll be too late to go looking today, she said. Early bird tomorrow. If Stan asks you anything, say you went to a couple of places and they took your phone number. Say a store or a restaurant or anything, just so long as he thinks you're looking. I was hired the next day at the first place I tried, though I hadn't managed to be such an early bird after all. Queenie had decided to do my hair still another way and to make up my eyes, but the result was not what she had hoped for. You're really more the natural type after all, she said, and I scrubbed it all off and put on my own red lipstick. By this time, it was too late for Queenie to go out with me to check on her post office box. She had to get ready to go to the movie theater. It was a Saturday, so she had to work in the afternoon as well as in the evening. She got out her key and asked me to check a box for her as a favor. She explained to me where it was. I had to get my own box when I wrote to your dad, she said. The job I got was in a drugstore in the basement of an apartment building. I was hired to work behind the lunch counter. When I first came in, I felt very hopeless. My hairstyle was drooping in the heat and I had a mustache of sweat on my upper lip. At least my cramps had moderated. A woman in white uniform was at the counter drinking coffee. Did you come about the job? She said. I said yes. The woman had a hard, square face, penciled eyebrows, a beehive of purplish hair. You speak English, do you? Yes. I mean, you didn't just learn it. You're not a foreigner. I said I wasn't. I tried out two girls in the last 2 days, and I had to let them both go. One, let on she could speak English, but she couldn't. And the other, I had to tell her everything 10 times over. Wash your hands good at the sink, and I'll get you an apron. My husband is the pharmacist, and I do the pier. I noticed for the first time a gray-haired man behind the high counter in the corner, looking at me and pretending not to. It's slow now, but it'll get busy in a while. It's all old people in this block, and after their naps, they start coming down here wanting coffee. I tied I tied on an apron and took my place behind the counter. Hired for a job in Toronto, I tried to find out where things were without asking questions and had to ask only two, how to work the coffee maker and what to do about the money. You make out the bill and they bring it to me. What did you think? It was all right. People came in, one or two at a time, mostly wanted coffee or Coke. I kept the cups washed and wiped the counter clean, and apparently I made out the beers properly as there was no complaint. The customers were mostly old people, as the woman had said. Some spoke to me in a kindly way, saying I was new here and even asking where I came from. Others seemed to be in a kind of trance. One woman wanted toast, and I made that. Then I did a ham sandwich. There was a little flurry with 4 people there at once. A man wanted pie and ice cream, and I found the ice cream hard as cement to scoop out. But I did it. I got more confident. I said to them, "Here you are," when I set down their orders, and "Here's the damage," when I presented the beer. In a slow moment, the woman from here came over. "I see you made somebody toast," she said. "Can you read?" She pointed to a sign stuck on the mirror behind the counter. "No breakfast items served after 11 a.m." I said that I thought it was okay to make toast if you could make toasted sandwiches. "Well, you thought wrong. Toasted sandwiches, yes. 10 cents extra. Toast, no. Do you understand now?" I said yes. I wasn't so crushed as I might have been at first. All the time I was working, I thought, what a relief it would be to go back and tell Mr. Vogela that, yes, I had a job. Now I could go and look for a room of my own to live in. Maybe tomorrow, Sunday, if the drugstore was closed. If I even had one room, I thought Queenie would have some place to run away to if Mr. Vogela got mad at her again. And if Queenie ever decided to leave Mr. Vogela, I persisted in thinking of this as a possibility, in spite of how Queenie had finished her story. Then, with the pay from both our jobs, maybe we could get a little apartment, or at least a room with a hot plate and a toilet and shower to ourselves. It would be like when we lived at home with our parents, except that our parents would be away. I garnished each sandwich with a bit of turnip lettuce and a deer picker. That was what another sign of the mirror promised. But when I got the deer picker out of a jar, I thought it looked like too much, so I cut it in half. I had just served the man a sandwich in this way when the woman from the tier came over and got herself a cup of coffee. She took her coffee back to the tier and drank it standing up. When the man had finished his sandwich and paid for it and left the store, she came over again. "You gave that man half a deer picker. Have you been doing that with every sandwich?" I said yes. "Don't you know how to slice a picker? One picker ought to last 10 sandwiches." I looked at the sign. I said, "It doesn't say a slice. It says a picker." "That's enough," the woman said. "Get out of that apron. I don't take any back talk from my employees. That's one thing I don't take. You can get your purse and get out of here. And don't go asking me where's your pay, because you haven't been any use to me anyway. And this was just supposed to be training." The gray-haired man was peeking out again with a faint smile. So I found myself out on the street again, walking to the streetcar stop. But I knew the way some streets went now, and I knew how to use a transfer. I had even had experience at a job. I could say that I had worked behind the lunch counter. If anybody wanted a reference, it would be tricky. But I could say the lunch counter was in my hometown. While I waited for the streetcar, I took out the list of other places where I meant to apply and the map that Queenie had given me. But it was later than I'd thought, and most places seemed too far away. I dreaded having to tell Mr. Vergilla. I decided to walk back in the hopes that when I got there, he'd have gone. I just I had just turned up the hill when I remembered the post office. I found my way back to it and got a letter out of the box and walked home again. Surely he'd gone by now, I thought, but he wasn't. When I walked past the open living room window that overlooked the path beside the house, I heard music. It wasn't what Queenie would play. It was the sort of complicated music that we had heard sometimes coming through the open windows of the Borgila's house. Music that demanded your attention and then didn't go anywhere, or at least didn't go anywhere fast enough. Classical. Queenie was in the kitchen, wearing another of her skimpy dresses and all her makeup. She had bangles on her arms. She was setting teacups on a tray. I was dizzy for a moment coming out of the sunlight, and every inch of my skin bloomed with sweat. Shh, Queenie said, because I'd closed the door with a crash. They're in there, listening to records. It's him and his friend Leslie. Just as she said, this, the music came to an abrupt halt, and there was a burst of excited talk. One of them plays a record, and the other has to guess what it is from just a little bit of it, Queen said. They play these little bits and then stop over and over. It drives you crazy. She started cutting slices of a delicatessen chicken and putting them on buttered slices of bread. Did you get a job? She said. Yes, but it wasn't permanent. Oh, well, she didn't seem very interested. But as the music started again, she looked up and smiled and said, Did you go to the... And she saw the letter I was carrying in my hand. She dropped the knife and came to me in a hurry, saying softly, We walked right in with it in your hand. I should have told you. Put it in your purse. My private letter. She grabbed it from my hand, and right at that moment, the kettle on the stove began to shriek. Oh, get the kettle, she said. Chrissy, quick, quick. Get the kettle or he'll be out here. He can't stand the sound. She had turned her back and was tearing open the envelope. I took the kettle off the burner and she said, Make the tea, please, in the soft, preoccupied voice of somebody reading an urgent message. Is it in the pot? I said. Yes, yes, just pour the water on. It's measured. She laughed as if my asking her that was a joke. I poured the water on the tea leaves and she said, Thanks, oh thanks, Chrissy, thanks. She turned around and looked at me. Her face was rosy, and all the bangles on her arms jingled with a delicate agitation. She folded up the letter and pulled up her skirt and tucked it under the elastic waistband over underpants. She said, Sometimes he goes through my purse. I said, Is the tea for him? For them? Yes. I have to get back to work. Oh, what am I doing? I have to cut the sandwiches. Where's the knife? I picked up the knife and cut the sandwiches and put them on a plate. Don't you want to know who my letter's from? She said. I couldn't think. I still had the sensation of the room moving around me, though it wasn't doing that anymore in a physical way. I said, that? Because I had the hope that a private forgiveness from Beth could be the thing that had made Queenie burst into flower. I had not even looked at the writing on the envelope. Queenie's face changed. Her mouth curled, and she said, hardly. Then she recovered her happiness. She came and put her arms around me and spoke into my ear in a voice that was shivering and shy and triumphant, as from Andrew. She said, can you take the tray in to them? I can't. I can't right now. Oh, thank you. Before Queenie went off to work, she came into the living room and kissed both Mr. Fogella and his friend. She kissed both of them on their foreheads. She gave me a butterfly wave and said, bye-bye. When I had brought the tray in, I saw the annoyance on Mr. Fogella's face, that it wasn't Queenie. But he spoke to me in a surprisingly tolerant way and introduced me to Leslie. Leslie was a stout bald man who at first looked to me almost as old as Mr. Vergilla. But when you got used to him and took his baldness into account, he looked much younger. He was not the sort of friend I would have expected Mr. Vergilla to have. He was not brusque or know-it-all, but comfortable and full of encouragement. For example, when I told about my employment at the lunch counter, he said, well, you know, that's something. Getting hired the first place you tried. It shows you know how to make a good impression. I had not found the experience hard to talk about. The presence of Leslie made everything easier and seemed to soften the behavior of Mr. Fogella, as if he had to show me a decent courtesy in the presence of his friend. It could also have been that he sensed a change in me. People do sense the difference when you're not afraid of them anymore. He would not be sure of this difference, and he would have no idea how it came about. But it would puzzle him and make him more careful. He agreed with Leslie when Leslie said I was well out of that job, and he even went on to say that the woman sounded like the sort of hard-bitten chiseler you sometimes found in that kind of hole-in-corner establishment in Toronto. And she had no business not paying you, he said. You'd think the husband might have come forward, said Leslie. If he was the druggist, he was the boss. He ought to brew up a special dose, Mr. Vogler said, for his wife. It wasn't so hard to pour out tea and offer milk and sugar and pass sandwiches and even talk. When you knew something other people didn't know about a danger they were in. It was just because he didn't know that I could feel something other than loathing for Mr. Vogella. It wasn't that he had changed it in himself, or if he had changed it, it was probably changed. It was probably because I had changed it enough to feel now almost less uneasy with him than I would have to feel with Queenie. Mr. Vergila soon said it was time for him to go to work. He went to change. He went to change his clothes. Then Leslie asked me if I would like to have supper with him. Just around the corner, there's a place I go, he said. Nothing fancy, nothing like Stan's place. I was glad enough to hear that it wouldn't be any place fancy. I said sure. And after we had dropped off Mr. Vogela at the restaurant, we drove in Leslie's car to a fish and fish chips place. Leslie ordered the super dinner, though he had just consumed several chicken sandwiches, and I ordered the regular. He had a beer and I had a coke. He talked about himself. He said he wished he had gone to teacher's college himself instead of choosing music, which did not make for a very settled life. I was too absorbed in my own situation even to ask him what kind of musician he was. My father had bought me a return ticket, he said, saying, "You never know how things are going to sit with him or and her." I had thought of that ticket at the moment. I watched Queenie tucking Andrew's letter under the fold over underpants. Even though I didn't yet know that it was Andrew's letter. I hadn't just come to Toronto to get a summer job. I had come to be part of Queenie's life, or if necessary, part of Queenie's and Mr. Vergila's life. Even when I had the fantasy about Queenie living with me, the fantasy had something to do with Mr. Vergila and how she would be serving him right. And when I thought of the return ticket, I was taking something else for granted, that I could go back and live with Beth and my father and be part of their life. My father and Beth, Mr. and Mrs. Vogela, Queenie and Mr. Vogela, even Queenie and Andrew. These were couples and each of them, however disjointed, had now or in memory a private burrow with its own heat and confusion, from which I was cut off. And I had to be, I wished it to be, cut off, for there was nothing I could see in their lives to instruct me or encourage me. Leslie, too, was a person cut off, yet he talked to me about various people he was connected to by ties of blood or friendship. His sister and her husband, his nieces and nephews, the married couples he visited and spent holidays with. The There was not one of these people he did not see in a fairly sunny light. All had problems, but all had value. He talked about their jobs, lack of jobs, talents, strokes of luck, errors in judgment, with great interest, but a lack of passion. He was cut off, or so he appeared to be, from love or vengefulness. I'd have been flawed. I would have seen flaws in this later in my life. I would have felt the impatience, even suspicion, a woman can feel towards a man who lacks a motive, who has only friendship to offer and offers that so easily and bountifully that even if it is rejected, he can move along as buoyantly as ever. Here was no solitary fellow hoping to hook up with a girl. Even I could see that. inexperienced as I was, just a person who took comfort in the moment and in a sort of reasonable facade of life. His company was just what I needed at the moment, though I hardly realized it. Probably he was being deliberately kind to me, as I had thought of myself being kind to Mr. Vergila, or at least protecting him, so unexpectedly a little while before. I was at teacher's college when Queenie ran away again. I got the news in a letter from my father. He said that he did not know just how or when it happened. Mr. Vergila hadn't let him know for a while, and then he had, in case Queenie had come back home. My father had told Mr. Vergila he didn't think there was much chance of that. In the letter to me, he said that at least it wasn't now the kind of thing he would say Queenie wouldn't do. For years, even after I was married, I would get a Christmas card from Mr. Vergila. Sleighs laden with bright passers, a happy family in a decorated doorway, welcoming friends. Perhaps he thought these were the sort of scenes that would appear to me in my present way of life, or perhaps he picked them blindly off the rack. He always included a written address, reminding me of his existence and letting me know where he was in case of any news. I had given up expecting that kind of news. I never even found out if it was Andrew Queenie went away with or somebody else, or whether she stayed with Andrew if he was the one. When my father died, there was some money left, and a serious attempt was made to trace her, but without success. But now something has happened. Now, in the years when my children are grown up and my husband has retired and he and I are traveling a lot, I have an idea that sometimes I see Queenie. It's not through any particular wish or effort that I see her, and it's not as if I believed it was really her either. Once it was in a crowded airport, and she was wearing a sarong and a flower-trimmed straw hat, tanned and excited, rich-looking, surrounded by friends. And once she was among the women at a church door, waiting for a glimpse of the wedding party. She wore a spotty suit jacket at that time, and she didn't look either prosperous or well. Another time, she was stopped at a crosswalk, leading a string of nursery school children on their way to the swimming pool or the park. It was a hot day, and her thick, middle-aged figure was frankly and comfortably on view, in flower shirts and a slogan t-shirt. The last and the strangest time was in a supermarket in Twin Falls, Idaho. I came around a corner carrying the few things I had collected for a picnic lunch, and there was an old woman leaning on her shopping cart, as if waiting for me. A little wrinkled woman with a crooked mouth and an unhealthy-looking brownish skin, hair in yellow-brown bristles, purple pants hitched up over the small mound of her stomach. She was one of those thin women who have nevertheless, with age, lost the convenience of a waistline. The pants could have come from some thrift shop, and so could the gaily colored but matted and shrunken sweater buttoned over her chest, no bigger than a 10-year-old's. The shopping cart was empty. She was not even carrying a purse. Unlike those other women, this one seemed to know that she was Queenie. She smiled at me with such merriment of recognition and such a yearning to be recognized that you'd think this was a moment granted to her when she was let out of the shadows for one day in 1,000. And all I did was stretch my mouth at her, and as at a loony stranger, and keep on going towards the checkout. Then in the parking lot, I made an excuse to my husband, said I'd forgotten something, and hurried back into the store. Went up and down the aisles, looking, and in just that little time, the old woman seemed to have gone. She might have gone out right after I did, and be making her way now along the streets of Twin Falls, on foot or in a car driven by some relative or neighbor, or even in a car she drove herself. It was possible, but hardly likely, that she was still in the store, and that we kept going up and down the aisles, just missing each other. That's it.